Are you sometimes overwhelmed by the news and the moral dilemmas and changes in modern medicine that now confront us each day? We'll explore that and more on today's edition of Life Matters. Brian Johnston is served in many capacities while advocating for innocent lives, as the Western Director of the National Right to Life Committee, as California Commissioner on Aging, as Chairman of the California Pro-Life Council, on the board of the National Legal Center for the Medically Dependent and Disabled. And now here's our host, Brian Johnston.
Do you know if the New York Times goes out of its way to celebrate your Christianity, then you need to be afraid. Be very afraid. Because this world's view of Christianity is actually very different than either biblical or Christ's view of Christianity. I'm going to talk about the praises that are being heaped on the late Jimmy Carter, former President of the United States, who recently died and was buried on January 9th of 2025. Now, that being said, I have to admit that being a professing Christian is not an easy thing, particularly in this culture, particularly today. Most of all, the dangers were written thousands of years ago and spoken of by Christ. Posturing. I hate Christian posturing, especially in myself. So I say these things with great caution. The scripture is clear. Our facts and our actions are clearly what define true religion, true Christianity. And if you like, for those of you who are Bereans, a Berean is someone who loves the Bible. James 1:27 is very clear about what true Christianity is. Pure and undefiled religion before God and the Father is this: to visit orphans and widows in their troubles and to keep oneself unspotted from the world. That's the scripture's definition of true religion. And yet so often in the scripture, we hear the stories of the Pharisees, and probably one of the more memorable, the story of the Pharisee and the tax collector. One was a false religious leader with all the outward show. The other was a genuinely broken and penitent man. That's one of Christ's more poignant teachings on this very important subject. The Good Samaritan is yet another. The real question for all of us is, how real is your faith or my faith? As we examine Jimmy Carter, I do so with that knowledge that we must be careful, but we also must be careful what we accept as genuine Christianity, what we're willing to praise, what we're willing to say is in fact Christian leadership, and what in fact is a ruse. The media has specialized in presenting a ruse of Christianity, and you need to understand that, and that nowhere is that clearer than in the case of James Earl Carter, former President of the United States.
Life Matters continues after this.
You know about our car donation program at California Pro-Life. We use one of the most respected programs in the nation. Go to the California Pro-Life page, californiaprolife.org. Scroll to the bottom and click on Donate My Car. It's that easy. Did you know you can also donate any vehicle, boat, motorhome, or even personal property? If you are nearing retirement age, you can also get a tax deduction by earmarking a portion of your upcoming compulsory distributions from your 401k. Just email us for information. California Pro-Life is fighting to equip California pro-lifers with understanding and the tools to again protect the unborn and other vulnerable innocents. Thank you for your help in this battle. Go to californiaprolife.org. That's californiaprolife.org for more information.
And now back to more Life Matters with Brian Johnston.
So welcome back. We're talking about Jimmy Carter. and how the media has exalted him now. During his presidency, they covered for him as a bumbling president, and there are many somewhat humorous stories. One about a rabid jackrabbit that jumped into a lake where he was rowing a boat and came after him. And I believe that was caught on film. I believe there is a picture of Jimmy Carter hapless, holding an oar and slapping a bunny rabbit trying to hop into his boat. But there are many other things about Jimmy Carter that have been idealized. And I want to examine that, but more. I want to examine what he really did. And I want to remind all of us, the reason you elect someone to public office is because of the policies that they're going to implement. The priority needs to be, what will this person do? And that's very clear in the scriptures as well. If you're a Christian, you're really defined by what you do. And what did he do as president? I'm going to tell you some things that the New York Times, NBC, ABC, PBS, they're not going to talk about. They are going to celebrate. Because some of the greatest damage done up to that time in American history was literally done under the presidency of James Earl Carter. Great evil was welcomed in under his White House auspices and with his full and complete blessing, in spite of the fact that he was a Southern Baptist Sunday school teacher. Great evils were knowingly ushered into the public policy of our nation at that time and with his blessing. Here's something that a lot of people don't know, just as a starter. In 1980, he convened the Presidential Conference on Families. Now that sounded great because all of us know that the family structure is essential and important. And if we look at studies that the fatherless children in this nation, they often are the ones that end up in trouble. They don't succeed. If you don't have a solid family, your odds of success are greatly harmed. So this sounded like a great policy. But what the media doesn't tell you, and yet was palpably present, is here was the first time declared that homosexual couples be considered families. Now, the media covered for that, and yet the media, as you know, has gone about implementing that ideology in our culture and giving it blessing. We'll talk about that another time. But the sacred Christian sacrament of matrimony was directly assaulted by the White House, and with a toothy Baptist grin, that somehow this was part of the family and the protection of families. In fact, it was part of the destruction of families. And yet, that's not talked about, even by Christians. They don't know or realize that that happened. But there's much more, particularly when it comes to the most important thing a president can do. Some of you know this, but if you don't, you need to understand that any executive office, whether it be governor or president, they get appointments to many positions, but once their term ends, so do those appointments, except the judiciary. The appointments to the judiciary, the appointment of judges, is the enduring legacy of any president. And of all presidents, this president, Jimmy Carter, had more appointments than any single-term president, and he had more appointments than some two-term presidents, like Obama, like Bill Clinton, like George W. Bush. Jimmy Carter, though he only served one term, he actually appointed a total of 262 federal judges during those 4 years in the White House. What you don't know and the media won't tell you is those judges had to be 100% pro-abortion. They had to genuflect before the altar of Baal. They had to say that, yes, unlimited abortion and baby killing will be blessed by the laws of this nation. So this is a sweeping act by the president insisting that all of the judges be 100% pro-abortion. And of course, if they're 100% pro-abortion, they're extremely leftist. They're embracing a culture of death, and all of their ideology will be leftist. It is, in fact, not simply a litmus test issue. It is indicative of someone's state of mind. It was required that for the Carter nominations, you be of the culture of death. Now, something else many people don't know or understand is that the reason this happened is that he had help in the White House from one individual, a lawyer by the name of Sarah Weddington. Some of you remember that name. Sarah Weddington was the lawyer in Texas who successfully argued for Roe v. Wade, and she won. So she was considered a lioness amongst lawyers. She was the top advisor to the president on judicial appointments and in particular on women's issues. She had his ear. Now, when it comes to judges, he did not get a Supreme Court appointment. But as I said, all of the judges he did appoint were to the federal bench. At the lower levels, just before the Supreme Court, much of federal law is not determined at the Supreme Court, but determined at the appellate level. And these appellate judges had dramatic impact on our culture quietly, insidiously, with the decisions they rendered. Sarah Weddington made sure that they were 100% pro-abortion. A famous name came up, already infamous, in fact, already notorious. It was her nickname. And that, of course, was none other than Ruth Bader Ginsburg, the notorious Ruth Bader Ginsburg. She was known to be radical. Many of you have heard my program before, but I've read her works, and I've read the works of Karl Marx and Engels. And many times, Ruth Bader Ginsburg directly quotes from Karl Marx. She does not attribute it to Karl Marx. She simply takes that faith, that belief, because Marxism is actually a faith. It's a belief. It's a complete failure for economic purposes. It's not an economic idea. Marxism is a religious idea about how people and how governments should live. And Ruth Bader Ginsburg was a Marxist. In her quotes, directly marking the destruction of the family and the disassembly of the family, and particularly the father-centered or the patristic or the patriarchal family, Ruth Bader Ginsburg made it her goal, and every true feminist makes it their goal, to destroy the patriarchy. Now remember, it is actually the ordered society in which we live that's built on the centrality of the family and the need, and this is nature itself. Just a quick aside. But if you think about it, when a young girl gets pregnant, and that's usually when women get pregnant, when they're young, now they're told to kill the baby. But historically, if a young woman got pregnant and didn't know what to do, she very much wanted a man in her life. And why is that? Because she knew she had to care for that baby. Her nature as a woman is to care for that baby, and nature itself has designed women that way. She wanted a man, and this is how nature has designed men, to protect and to provide, and she wants that. Marriage is actually by design, in God's design. It's the natural flow of life. It's how we're made. Now, there's a lot of debate about men and women. We're not going to spend time on this, but I don't believe a woman can become a man because he says so and can play in women's sports. That's madness. Biology speaks louder than words, and that's the case with pregnancy. The abortion mentality is designed to destroy the natural course of human development and culture, to destroy the family, to destroy the idea that a woman needs a man to protect her and to build a family. That's at direct variance with feminism, as classically defined. Many Christians are willing to say, oh, I'm a Christian feminist. That is a contradiction, and that contradiction was made manifest in the fake feminist Christianity of both James Carter and his wife, Rosalind Carter. They were radical progressives who actually employed policies that destroyed the family. There's more, and when we come back, I'm going to talk about some of the real issues of Jimmy Carter that the media has covered up in their silence and instead have lionized very real tangents of what the role of president is about. In his role as president, Jimmy Carter did more to destroy America than ever help it. And you need to know that.
Life Matters continues after this.
I want to remind you of my book, Evil Twins, Roe and Doe, How the Supreme Court Unleashed Medical Killing. Available on Amazon and wherever fine books are sold. I recommend getting the Kindle version because there's links to all the documenting evidence. This isn't because I say it. This is actually what reality is. Every pro-life and even pro-abortion legal expert admits Roe v. Wade makes no sense. It's actually Doe v. Bolton that unleashed doctors to kill a baby at any time whenever they wanted. You need to find out those facts, and they're documented. And the fact is we're not addressing the reality of legalized abortion. We want to help you understand this battle right now. You can get the audio version online. Evil Twins, Roe and Doe, How the Supreme Court Unleashed Medical Killing. You're going to come away from the book with a new understanding of what this battle is actually about.
And now back to more Life Matters with Brian Johnston.
Welcome back. We're talking about James Earl Carter, who is supposedly a great Christian hero because he taught Sunday school in the Southern Baptist Church near where he lived. He had an artifice of humility, but you're going to see that much of that was actually artifice for consumption by the media and for promotion to you as a consumer of media. But Jimmy Carter brought great evil. I've already mentioned all of the judges he appointed. He appointed 262 federal judges, more than any other single-term president in history. All of those judges had to be supportive of the culture of death. Now, the media doesn't talk about it. They didn't talk about the policy of his judges. They basically said, oh, he appointed a lot of women judges and people of color. Isn't that great? But immediately afterward, when Ronald Reagan appointed women judges, and Ronald Reagan appointed black and Hispanic judges, that was immediately considered suspect because the media wanted to know their judicial temperament. And now suddenly, what those judges thought and their policies became of paramount importance because Ronald Reagan appointed them, and they would be conservative. And the media went out of its way, for those of you who lived during that time, the media went out of its way to attack, to excoriate, to defame the judicial appointments of Ronald Reagan. One of the most famous was Justice Bork. I spent time with Justice Bork at the Proudly Pro-Life banquet in New York City. And he was a great thinker, a great man, but the media participated in vilifying and slandering him. And the Democrat Party and the Democrat Senate stopped at nothing to destroy him. But he was merely one of many who were slandered, and many that are still on the bench continued to be slandered. One is Justice Clarence Thomas. He's a black man, but he's a conservative black man. The media is continuing its defamation, its slander of Justice Thomas. But he's a black man, and supposedly that's the whole issue, isn't it? No, it's not. You're in a battle of ideas. And if you don't see that those ideas have been turned against you and twisted, then you're not going to win in this battle. You're going to be a target. And I want to help you. And so we're looking at the history of James Earl Carter, the Southern Baptist grinning president that was elected right after Nixon stepped down. And it's because he wasn't Richard Nixon. He was the anti-Nixon in a sense. That's how he was presented. But he actually brought great cultural evils through the White House and into our nation. We've pointed out that the judges that he appointed, and he had more appointments than any other single-term president, they had to be pro-death leftist judges. The media was glad to accommodate that. Why? Because your major media is, in fact, sympathetic to the leftist pro-death crowd. If you don't see that, if you don't understand that yet, then you've got a long ways to go. Because you're being told things, and the ideas and the words that are used commonly are used to bend you in a particular direction. One of our earlier programs dealt with polling. Polling is actually designed to not measure public opinion, but to mold public opinion. Oh, most people think this way. Why aren't you thinking that way? You need to think this through and follow the polls and do what you're told. Follow the crowd. In fact, as I told my kids growing up, if you follow the crowd, if you go with the flow, well, that's exactly what a corpse does. A corpse will go with the flow. You need to have understanding and resolve and not be influenced by the tumult of events or by the words and language being used. I realize as you listen to this that the Jimmy Carter burial is long in the past. Many more things have come, but I don't want you to forget that he actually was responsible for these great evils. And despite the fact he used the name of Christianity and the media exalted his brand of Christianity, it was for a show. And I do want to be careful, but I have to tell you the truth. And the fact is that there was a show presented as to who he was, as to his Christian virtue. He was involved in helping folks by building houses. Now, I'll talk more about this in another episode, but just because I help somebody build a house, does that make me virtuous? If I have actually promoted the destruction of my country, if I have said that homosexuals should be parents, that that's part of what a family is, if I have used my office to actually make sure that every judge was pro-abortion, was far left, does my swinging a hammer now make me virtuous? Or is it actually a distraction? Is it actually tithing mint and anise, as it says in Scripture? Is it a show of religiosity? Again, we want to be careful if we're talking about someone being all for show, because who are we to judge? But we are called to judge. It says in the Scripture that you who are spiritual must use judgment. Now, this wasn't talked about by the media, but those who knew him best, his detail when it comes to Secret Service, they said that his smiling man of the people image about him carrying his own luggage was all show. It was all for show, and that he treated them with disdain. He was rude and short. And then even with the military, even though he had served in the military, he considered the military beneath him, and he was dismissive of them. In the book, The First Family Detail by Ronald Kessler, who was one of his Secret Service detail, he actually said that Carter was more hated than any other president the Secret Service had worked with up to that time. Carter actually told Secret Service agents and uniformed officers he didn't want to see them, and he did not want them to greet him on his way to the Oval Office. This was too much of a bother for him. They were not to talk to him in any way. He also clearly disdained, and I will read now directly from this article about this book, that in the White House years, Carter was known by agents as aloof and unapproachable and did not have time for the military either. Although he was a Naval Academy graduate himself, he always talked down to the military and talked like they didn't know what they were talking about, one agent said. Carter didn't want military aides to wear uniforms, former agent Cliff Baranowski recalled. His icy demeanor would make him the most detested commander-in-chief by Secret Service agents of all U.S. presidents in recent memory. The Secret Service said, and I remember this at the time, he would carry his own bags to Air Force One and to Marine One. But the Secret Service said, what a game. There was nothing in those bags of luggage. He was pretending to be Mr. Humble. Now, I've spoken about communism and Marxism in the past, and if you think communism and Marxism is an economic system, you're quite wrong. It's a way of life, a belief system, and there are many Marxists, as you know, in the modern universities in the U.S. That's where Marxism continues. So it's not about the Russians. It's not about nationality. It's about ideas. And it's the idea that a republic is not the proper form of government. That is at the heart of Marxism. Marxism believes you need to have a government that shares everything by force of arms. We will make you share. We're all going to be the same, and we're going to force you to do these things, to comply, because we're the ones who know best. And Jimmy Carter, believe it or not, embodied that way of thinking. I'll talk about this more, but please understand that the Marxist worldview is antithetical to a biblical worldview and to the worldview of a republic. They don't want the people to have an actual voice. They want the smart and elites to be the leaders. Jimmy Carter considered himself to be a smart elitist, and the Secret Service saw it personally and up close. He disdained them in particular. He disdained the military because the military was upholding an old system. Again, Marxists believe in progressivism. That's why they call it progressives. And progressives, like Jimmy Carter, want America to be in the rearview window. They want them in the past. They're progressing to a new way of doing things. Jimmy Carter wanted to be done with the presidency as an honorary position. He tried to talk it down. He tried to remove Hail to the Chief and the honors that were given to the President of the United States. He wanted to dramatically transform how America functioned, and he did it aggressively and assertively, and the media protected that. And they did it by pretending, well, he's just going to be a common man. He's one of the proletariat. He's just a regular common guy, and he's a Christian too. So you Christians should really honor him, as he was destroying the very values, the families of America, the lives of the vulnerable who were being killed through abortion. He actively was an agent at the highest level of government to implement those policies. And if you haven't heard about it, you need to know it now. And you need to recognize it because that is still going on. It's going on all around you. And until you recognize how unwise ideas are camouflaged, you're not going to understand the battle. Yes, he went to a Baptist church, and maybe you do. Maybe the church you go to has people who are misrepresenting the truth of that church, that are actually bringing in great evil. You have to recognize it and be willing to say, hang on a second, that isn't exactly what our church believes in. What he was advocating was not what the Southern Baptist Convention believed in, nor was it what good Christians believe in. And yet the media gave him a pass and have continued to exalt him as an example of the right kind of president. Don't believe that, because life is at stake in these policies, and life matters.
If you have questions or comments for Life Matters, call 800-924-2490. Give us your name and the town you're calling from, and a quick question or comment. Learn more about everything in today's show online at lifematters.life, where you'll find all the resources you need to protect life. Life Matters is a production of the California Pro-Life Council.